Number 9. Jacqueline ADES. After signing up on a dating website for people seeking wealthy partners a number of years ago, a young woman from Maricopa County, Arizona named Jacqueline ADES met with a man who wasn't interested in a second date. Refusing to take no for an answer, she began to stalk him relentlessly. Over the following 10 months, ADES sent the victim over 159,000 text messages. One day in 2017, she showed up uninvited at his house and was escorted off the property by police. She continued to escalate her behavior. In addition to messaging the man non-stop, her correspondence took an increasingly gruesome and sadistic tone. ADES told the man that she wanted to wear his flesh, devour his organs, and make sushi from his kidneys and chopsticks from his hand bones. She took things to a disturbing new level in 2018 when she broke into the victim's house while he was out of the country. The man spotted ADES on his home surveillance footage and called the police, who discovered her inside taking a bath as if she lived there. They also found a butcher knife in the front seat of her car. After missing multiple court dates for criminal charges related to her stalking and other bizarre behavior, ADES was held at the Maricopa County Jail. During a jailhouse press conference, she told reporters that she believed the jury would find her innocent and want her victim to marry her, and she rejected a plea deal that would have brought the case to a much quicker end. As the interview went on, her behavior became even more strange. ADES began to make completely outlandish claims, including that Walt Disney had abducted her as a child and that she was a member of the Illuminati. She was ultimately deemed incompetent to stand trial. Several court-appointed psychiatrists deemed the woman's mental health unrestorable, and her case was dismissed. In many cases, a person accused of a crime would see this as a better outcome than facing a jury, but ADES insisted on having her case heard. That never happened, and she was sent to a mental health facility with plans for her parents to move her to Florida to live with them. At the very least, it got her away from her victim and ensured that she would receive continued supervision from people with her best interests at heart. Number 8. Michelle Felton. 28-year-old Michelle Felton couldn't accept that her relationship with Ryan Harley was over after he broke up with her in 2022. She allegedly contacted Harley so many times, begging for him back, that he became seriously mentally unstable. He reported receiving as many as 150 text messages and phone calls per day, driving him to the brink of insanity. Felton asked Harley why he wouldn't speak to her, told him she loved him, and more or less acted like they were still together. She asked him if they were meeting up and what their plans were. When Harley failed to respond to Felton because he was taking his driver's test, Felton accused him of cheating on her. The messages weren't threatening, but they were constant, and Felton's behavior escalated. Harley finally went to the police when his seemingly deranged ex began leaving gifts on the doorstep of the home he shared with his mother in Cheshire, England. He told officers that all he wanted was for Felton's incessant harassment to stop, and authorities arrested her for her alleged behavior. Harley also reportedly described the former couple's nearly 2-year relationship as toxic and controlling. The pair began dating in May 2020 and broke up in early 2022 following an argument that got physical. According to the prosecution, Harley said he accidentally broke Felton's finger after she kicked him in the groin. At the time of the incident, authorities decided not to prosecute, but the relationship itself was over, at least as far as Harley was concerned. Felton pleaded not guilty to coercive behavior, but admitted to harassment. She could have faced jail time, but instead, the judge issued a restraining order banning her from contacting or going near Harley. She was also hit with an 18-month community order, which requires her to follow certain rules, or she'll risk being put behind bars. Under the order's terms, Felton must attend a 30-day rehab program and pay a fine and restitution. Number 7. Kevin Gary. Real estate agent Harvette Williams met Kevin Gary during the late 90s at a professional networking event in the Detroit area. Gary told Williams that he was interested in buying a property with her help, but instead he began to stalk her relentlessly shortly after their first fateful meeting. He showed up at Harvette's church, her workplace, and even her home. Williams obtained an order of protection, but Gary was quick to violate it by calling her on the phone repeatedly. His behavior allegedly became more bizarre with time, and at one point Williams even accused Gary of licking her bedroom mirror. By the time Gary was finally convicted of stalking in 2005, it had been going on for a decade. Unfortunately for Williams, the judge overseeing the case sentenced him to time served. As you may have already figured out, it wasn't long before Gary violated the terms of his release. His probation was revoked, and he received a sentence of 13 months to 5 years in prison for aggravated stalking. He served 4 years. During Gary's time behind bars, Williams worked tirelessly to protect other survivors by campaigning for new laws that would require convicted stalkers to wear a GPS monitoring device for up to 2 years following their release from prison. After his release, Gary sued Williams for $100 million, accusing her and a true crime TV series of slander and of waging baseless stalking allegations against him. Despite the fact that he pleaded guilty to the charge, he even went as far as claiming that he and Williams were in a consensual relationship and that she had, in fact, stalked him. A court rejected the lawsuit, and Gary has kept largely quiet on the matter ever since. Number 6. Ryan Clutter. Cameron Wallace was a high school student in Ohio when she befriended an awkward loner named Ryan Clutter in 1996. She felt bad for him, so she treated him with the kindness he didn't receive from other students. But Clutter apparently misread his new friend's behavior and began making unwelcome advances, so Wallace began to distance herself from him. But the more she avoided Clutter, the tighter he seemed to cling. Over the next decade, Wallace endured a relentless and terrifying stalking campaign that infiltrated every imaginable aspect of her life. Clutter bombarded her with constant taunting and threats of physical harm, and he made it clear that he would stop at nothing to get to her. Wallace became convinced that her stalker was going to kill her. She obtained an order of protection against Clutter, and he was arrested for menacing and put on probation for his behavior in 2003, but it did little to deter him from continuing to torture Wallace. With a lack of other options to feel safe, she put her entire life on hold and moved in with her mother, only to discover that her stalker had a habit of lurking in the woods behind their house. The Wallaces put brown paper over their windows to prevent Clutter from being able to see inside, and at one point they were so scared about what he might do that the entire family slept in one room. The last straw came when Clutter broke into Wallace's home, took photos of her while she was sleeping, and then emailed the pictures to her. He was finally arrested in 2006. During a raid on Clutter's home, police found a shrine devoted to Wallace, consisting of a poster-sized photo of the victim and other relics, including stolen clothing of hers. Officers also seized a .45 caliber handgun. A detective who worked the case said that he believed Clutter was just days away from killing Wallace when he was taken into custody. The investigation revealed additional incriminating evidence which was unrelated to the stalking case, and Clutter was sentenced to 13 years in prison for his crimes. Since then, Wallace has campaigned relentlessly for heightened legal protections for stalking victims in her state, in hopes that something good will come out of her hellish ordeal. Number 5. Elizabeth Reynolds. Former Border Patrol agent Albert Benitez was working as a college professor in Texas when he met and began dating Elizabeth Reynolds. At the time, they were married to other people but were separated from their spouses. And while Benitez was honest about not wanting to remarry, he was apparently unaware that this deeply bothered Reynolds and set in motion a series of events that would forever change his life. One afternoon in 2003, the couple were relaxing at Albert's remote home when someone knocked on the front door. Benitez answered and found himself face to face with an armed man who asked him to confirm his identity. He slammed the door shut and instructed Reynolds to call the police. As Benitez held the door shut, the gunman shot through it. The intruder then got in through a side door and proceeded to continue shooting at Benitez, who ran to his parents' house for help. By the time first responders arrived, the shooter had allegedly kidnapped Reynolds. Benitez miraculously survived 6 gunshots and was able to tell police that he saw the suspect drive off with his girlfriend in a Crown Victoria. Reynolds approached a cop later that same day, claiming she had been abducted and that the kidnapper had shot her boyfriend. She said that the perpetrator was wearing a mask and that he jumped out of the car while driving at a high speed. It wasn't long before investigators realized that Reynolds' story didn't align with the evidence. For one, she claimed she dialed 911 at some point throughout the intrusion, but there was no record of the call. Police found a shirt on the roadside matching her description of the shooter, but it was in suspiciously good condition for supposedly having gone through the day's events. Furthermore, records revealed that Reynolds had extensive contact with someone named Perez in the months leading up to the attack and wired money to the person the day after the shooting. Reynolds was convicted of solicitation of murder and was sentenced to life in prison with an earliest possible parole date in September of 2035. Number 4. James Conyers. The nightmare of a lifetime began in 2002 for Olympic gold medalist Sheila Tearmina when a man named James Conyers responded to her advertisement she had placed offering swimming lessons. Conyers claimed to be a successful triathlete from Flint, Michigan, and asked Tearmina for help lowering his swimming times. She was initially happy to oblige, but things turned sour the very next day when Conyers said during another phone conversation that he expected her to have his baby in a few years. At that point, Tearmina told Conyers to leave her alone, which made him very angry. His alarming behavior only escalated from there. He called Tearmina repeatedly and at all hours, sent her unwanted packages and mailed her explicit postcards. In one letter, Conyers detailed his plans to violate and assault Tearmina, and on one occasion he appeared while she was exercising along a bike trail. The U.S. Olympic Committee advised Tearmina to leave her hometown of Livonia. She went into hiding at a motel in Colorado Springs, unsure of what the future held, as she was haunted by horrifying dreams of what Conyers might do if he tracked her down. Conyers was arrested on 2 counts of aggravated stalking 6 months after the ordeal began. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to wear an electronic monitoring device, but this was hardly the end of the nightmare. The convicted stalker never picked up the monitoring device. Instead, he went right back to stalking Tearmina while she trained in Florida. A judge issued a warrant for Conyers' arrest for violating probation. He was finally picked up on it in 2003 and received a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison for his crimes, with the possibility of parole. Conyers was denied parole throughout the entirety of his sentence due to the 21 misconduct charges he caught during his time behind bars. At one point, he wrote to the local district attorney threatening to sue for slander and libel, but it's unclear whether the threats ever came to fruition. In 2009, less than a year after being released from prison, Conyers was arrested yet again for allegedly stalking an Indiana State University women's basketball player named Kelsey Cooley. According to Cooley, Conyers had called her a week earlier pretending to be an alumnus and former athlete who attended the same university. By then, he had already been ordered to stay away from the campus due to an unrelated incident. The ban allowed authorities to charge Conyers with criminal trespass. When they searched him, they found a student directory in his possession. Conyers was ordered to stay away from campus and have no contact with the alleged victim, and the outcome of the case is unclear. Number 3. Michael Garrett. Sylvia Matthews was working at a prison pharmacy in Washington, D.C. more than 2 decades ago when she met an inmate named Michael Garrett. In 1999, Garrett was arrested for breaking into Sylvia's home, and he ended up back in prison. The day before the break-in, Sylvia had reported hearing the sound of glass shattering from somewhere in or around her house. She went to see what it was and found Garrett climbing into the home through her bedroom window. He chased Sylvia out of the house, but luckily the police arrived in time to arrest him before he could physically harm her. Garrett spent more than 20 years in prison before being released in early 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. His lawyer successfully argued in court that he was rehabilitated and no longer posed a threat to society. By then, Garrett was in his 60s, and a lot of time had passed since the last time he had contact with Sylvia, who was now 71 years old. But Sylvia was apparently still on Garrett's mind, and his continued fixation with her soon led to tragedy. Despite his lawyer's claims that he had changed from his old ways, Garrett allegedly showed up at Sylvia's home repeatedly after his release. At least one of his unwanted visits was captured on surveillance footage. Sylvia told the police that Garrett had threatened to kill her, but he remained a free man. Just days before Christmas in 2021, Sylvia's neighbors dialed 911 early in the morning and reported hearing a loud noise coming from her house. Police arrived to find the windows of her SUV smashed and signs of an attempted break-in at one of the home's entrances. Just hours later, police received another call from a neighbor who said they believed Sylvia was being held hostage inside her house. Officers entered the home and found the senior citizen unresponsive with serious injuries. She was rushed to the hospital where she would later die from her injuries. The cops also found Garrett at the scene. He claimed Sylvia had called him over just minutes earlier due to a burglary, but the police suspected that he played a bigger role in the situation and took him into custody on suspicion of murder. Sylvia's family told the press that they feel the system failed her and that Garrett should have not been free to kill her. Number 2. Lindley MacArthur. Lee Marie De Palma was working and living in the small community of Barrie, Ontario back in the early 80s when she was abducted from a local mall shortly after dropping her son off at daycare. Nobody realized she was missing until she failed to pick the little boy up. She was found strangled to death 8 months later. The case was a true whodunit for a while. DNA technology didn't exist yet, and there was no forensic evidence tying anyone specific to the crime scene. Answers finally came when a 21-year-old inmate named Lindley Charles MacArthur bragged to fellow prisoners about stalking and killing De Palma while he was serving time for an unrelated conviction. MacArthur said he followed De Palma for about a week before he kidnapped her, and that he committed the brutal assault and murder as a birthday gift to himself. Jailhouse informants ratted on him, and while sometimes inmates lie to try getting a break on their own sentence, the snitches in this case were able to provide authorities with information about the crime scene that had not been released to the public. In other words, they shared details that only the killer would have been able to tell them. MacArthur was convicted of De Palma's murder and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. De Palma's husband Joe remarried and moved on with his life, but he never forgot what happened to his former wife and has worked diligently to try keeping MacArthur behind bars by attending all of his parole hearings and speaking out against the killer's release. Number 1. Christopher Carl Haas. For 2.5 years, starting in 2007, a man in his 50s named Christopher Carl Haas terrorized at least 9 women, including several news anchors, school teachers, and a real estate agent in the San Diego area with threatening letters and emails. He reportedly told the women to wear certain clothing items or accessories, or to say or do certain things during their broadcasts, and said that he would assault or strangle them, or worse, if they failed to comply. In some of the messages, he even referred to himself as a dangerous sicko, as if to acknowledge that he was shamelessly aware of his deranged behavior. Law enforcement identified Haas as their prime suspect through fingerprints on some of the letters and through DNA. He was finally arrested in early 2010 on a slew of charges, including multiple counts of stalking and making criminal threats. During a search of his car, investigators found his victims' names and contact information. One victim, a school teacher named Carla Bordelot, testified in court that she received a phone call from Haas one day seemingly out of the blue. Once she confirmed her identity to the caller, he immediately warned her that he was a sick and dangerous man. He ordered her to giggle to prove that she wasn't nervous, and if Bordelot answered yeah instead of yes, Haas reprimanded her. She said she hung up and called the police and that the exchange frightened her. Another victim, news anchor Artel Neville, contacted the police after receiving a threatening letter at her workplace. In the letter, Haas described things he had allegedly done to other women. And while detectives found no evidence of the suspect acting on any of his threats, the victims were undoubtedly traumatized by his words. Haas's attorney argued that his client was experiencing emotional turmoil and that he wasn't himself during his prolonged crime spree. But Haas eventually owned up to his behavior, on some level at least, and pleaded guilty to 4 counts each of felony stalking and making a criminal threat, along with 1 misdemeanor count of making harassing phone calls. Thanks for watching. Would you rather uproot your entire life and start over somewhere else completely from scratch to get away from a stalker, or be falsely convicted of a stalking charge and sentenced to 5 years of probation? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.